Hello, guys. Hope everyone's doing well. Tom and I are here with you this week. Jen is actually enjoying a much-deserved vacation, so she's taking the time off. So you're left with the
A
two
fuzzy
handsome
face
ones of us.
version.
And ultimately, when we're going through and talking, we wanted to kind of cover some of the stuff that is going on in the world of Microsoft. We don't have one of the fancy spreadsheets that Jen always goes through and puts together for us because she's the one who handles that, which is good. But ultimately, we wanted to kind of still talk to you about some of the stuff going on in the world and what's happening, so you guys are kind of in the loop. So kind of how we're going to do this, Tom and I will kind of take turns, or just as we have information, be introducing and kind of giving a high-level overview about a topic. And if we think it's necessary, we may talk back and forth some about the things going on. But just kind of giving you guys an understanding of the different stuff happening in the Microsoft world. So, Tom, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Sure, we can do that. So, using the Message Center, which has, of course, all the things that are coming and rolling out and doing all these things, there were a few things that I saw like over the course of the last week that were interesting. One of them, in fact, no, let's just go right to the ones that are going to probably have the most conversation there, Adam. There were two entries about search. One of them is kind of cool. It's refreshing the Microsoft Search in Bing user experience. And that means that if you're using Microsoft Search, which is turned on by default, and it's using the Bing search engine, then what you end up doing is you kind of get um, a combined search result page that has stuff that you would normally see if you were just going out to Bing and searching, but you also have a work tab. And the work tab that you have gives you the ability to do your normal searches that you would see within your SharePoint environment or your Office 365 environment. So it's important to keep in mind that your information is not being exposed externally, even if you're using Bing. It may look like that. It's just taking your stuff in your environment and giving you that combined view to where you can see both relevant things external and internal. It's also not sharing any of that information with Microsoft to improve search results, quote unquote. It's just a way to give you the ability to do a search that spans more than just your internal thing. So if you search for some particular phrase and you're looking for images, you can just use the work tab to see images that are within your environment. But you could also click on the images tab, which is going to give you images it's pulling from a regular Bing search. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
The second one, which is going to have a little bit more discussion here, which was announced this week and in the blogs and Twitter and stuff like that, it hasn't gone over very well at all. And that is beginning with version 2002 of Office 365 Pro Plus. Microsoft is by default going to install a browser extension that makes Bing your default search engine if you're using Google, and they're envisioning that Firefox will also get the same treatment. So it's going to be available as it sits right now in February of 2020 for monthly channels, early March for those particular, or I'm sorry, monthly channel targeted February 2020, regular monthly channel in March 2020, and then upcoming releases for channel targeted and semi-annual channel there. The thing is, it's turned on by default, and that is not a great thing as far as people are concerned. It's like, don't be telling me that you're going to switch my browser experience and my search default experience, and I have to go through extra steps to turn it off if I
Yeah.
don't want it. So, Adam, you want to add some color there? Because I know that
Sure.
basically on Twitter, it's like I haven't seen anybody going, wow, this is a really cool thing. I've heard terms such as Bush League.
Yep.
You know, this would be considered a malware thing from any other vendor. So, yeah, it's not a good deal.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let me start off by saying the combined search is awesome. I think that's
Yes.
really cool what they're going through and doing with it. My doorbell's going off, so sorry about that. But I think the combined search is awesome. Going on to this new feature that they're going through and rolling out. Yeah, I've seen Bush League, I've seen Lowbrow, I've seen people saying it's below Microsoft or beneath them. Definitely, it seems kind of not well thought out in my opinion. You for the longest time, I'm sure Tom has experienced the same thing. As someone who's worked almost exclusively with Microsoft products, it's almost a running joke amongst consultants that work on Microsoft products how bad Bing is. Like you'll be sitting there talking at a conference and you'll be going through and saying, "Oh yeah, you can just Google that," and you'll be like, "Oh, I mean Bing. You can Bing that, right?" But Microsoft has never demonstratively pushed that on people, which I think I've always respected them for. So seeing this come out, it's definitely not really what you want to see. I kind of imagine with all the backlash, they may like give the option to control this, but I hope they do that at least. But I guess we're going to have to see over time. This is definitely one of the things we'll be monitoring and kind of trying to keep people up to date on, because this is something that, especially if you don't really pay that close attention to what's going on, suddenly this change can go through and you can have, a small dumpster fire on your hands at your office while you're trying to figure out what's going on. So we'll be interested to see.
And I can see why you might want that, going back to the Microsoft search and Bing user experience changes. Yeah, there are some benefits for using Bing as your search engine within an Office 365 environment. And if you have a browser extension that gives you that same thing, if you're using Chrome and Firefox, that's pretty good in terms of giving you additional capability. Just don't tell me that I have no choice to decide whether I want to use it or not. My only choice is, how do I turn the stupid thing off when it shows up? So, yeah.
Not the greatest. Do we want to go? Let's go ahead and keep the negative Nancy train moving for a bit.
Okay.
One other thing we probably want to talk about here that I'm sure many people have probably heard referenced or seen an article about, that also is kind of a misstep for Microsoft. So a partner that Microsoft used that handled analytics for them accidentally left some data exposed in plain text accessible in the cloud in the month of December.
How much data would that be, Adam?
Yeah, so this happened between December 5th and December 31st. And so when I first saw this, I was like, oh, that's not bad. That's not even a full month. They left approximately 250 million customer records exposed. What these records were actually support request information. So if you opened up a case with Microsoft through the normal support through Premiere, whatever, I'm not sure the exact channels it affected, but basically if you had used their support, this was details about the conversations you had, stuff like that was going on. And honestly, if you think about it, there can be some pretty sensitive information there. This isn't username and passwords, but there can still be some pretty proprietary sensitive information in there that was basically left readable and searchable. The company that found it out came out and released some additional information, because Microsoft just released this very basic. The update was called Access Misconfiguration per Customer Support Database, where they went out 2 days ago. So they went out on Tuesday and released this update on their blog saying, "Oh, hey, we accidentally did this. Sorry about this. We've taken actions to do it." The company that actually exposed the leak came out after their update and released a little bit more information, and it's bad and doesn't look very good for Microsoft. So I kind of mentioned it was exposed from December 5th through the 31st, but it actually had support data going back a 14-year span. So all the way back to 2005, if any time basically in the last 14 years you've used support with Microsoft, which if you are listening to us, I imagine you probably have, there's a good chance that some of the information about your support logging was actually exposed. So not a good look at all, something that's kind of shocking when you think about it, 250 million records exposed. Luckily, this wasn't necessarily something that, was out there for years and years and years, and, the bad agents knew about it. It was literally only exposed for, like 4 weeks, and was actually, found and reported to Microsoft so they could remediate the issue. But regardless, not a good look, Tom.
No, definitely not a good look. And again, it's good that it wasn't like, oh, here's username and passwords for 250 million Microsoft Office 365 tenants.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you're sitting there saying, hey, we've got a site that does XYZ and da 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 da, and we need help, and here's the back and forth, and I'm sure there's, hey, can you give me a user ID that I can use to check with? Or
talking about other, I mean, I'm just thinking of some of the support instances I've had just in the last 5 years or so, talking about the actual setup of the internal infrastructure of some of my clients as we're going through and trying to set up hybrid configurations with the cloud and things like that. It seems pretty messy.
Yeah, I would not want to be the person responsible for trying to clean that mess up and message yourself through it, because I don't think there's any way you spin it that it becomes a really good deal.
No, it's not.
So
Anyways,
should we switch to more benign stuff that's not going to create a fire?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and throw something out there that I feel like is a very positive note, then we can move on to some of the other good stuff too. So one of the things that's actually buzzing really happily or really excitedly with my coworkers. At Planet where I work, there's about 250 employees, and most of them work on Microsoft products day in and day out. So Microsoft actually just recently announced and launched, so you can go in and get your hands on it, a new Chromium-based Edge browser. And so if you're with a company that wants you to use Edge, or that's your default browser, or for the instance on some of the people in my company, like maybe you worked at Microsoft for a long time, so you kind of drink their own Kool-Aid, you were maybe using Edge. Well, they actually came out with long since planned and developed Chromium-based Edge browser, and all the feedback that I've seen internally has been extremely positive. I think it's great. It functions really well. It seems to have versions for iOS, for Android, for Windows, everything that's going through and working the way that you would expect, and having a really good user experience. And so for companies that are out there that, for security reasons like to use Edge, like to have that control where they can go through and do it with some of the stuff you can do with Intune and EMS, seems like to be a pretty cool update and things people are pretty excited about.
Yeah, I've got it downloaded, but I haven't done anything with it yet because we've been so heads down in migration activities, and then January's been, issues dealing with the migration activities, and then I'm going to be off on vacation for 3 more weeks. So that's kind of one of those things that probably in late February, sometime in March, I want to download it and start putting it through its paces and see if that becomes my replacement for using regular Edge, because at least in our particular environment, we have found that Internet Explorer, which, yes, we still use IE11, performs really, really badly in our particular scenario with Office 365. And so we tell people either use Chrome or Edge. The Chromium-based Edge might be, a really good option for people to go to. So we'll see.
Seems cool.
Okay. A couple things that I will combine here. Actually, 3 things I'll combine here that are Microsoft Teams related. One is that we are looking at getting lobby control for dial-in attendees. So if you use Teams for meetings where you have people dialing in external, you can now have them sit in the lobby, or you can say who has the ability to bypass the lobby, kind of the same features you have in Skype. So again, this is the one more step towards getting Teams up to a parity with Skype and some of the meeting capabilities, so that when Skype does, quote unquote, go away, Teams will be able to take these over, and there'll be less of this, hey, I need this feature because I used it in Skype and it's not there. Another one, which probably isn't as critical as that, but a new feature to do announcing when dial-in users join and leave a meeting. So, in Skype, you get the ching, ching as people are going in and out, and you're like, where's the option for me to turn that stupid thing off? You're now going to have the ability to have that sort of announcement when people come and go. So that's important to you, to have some sort of an audio indication as to when somebody is coming into your meeting or leaving it. That's going to be an option that you're going to have coming up here real soon. The last thing, and this one I'll just recommend that if it's of interest to you, I would definitely go take a look at Message Center or something like this, because there's a lot of, if you're this and not that, and this happens, then this is the case, and what's the ramifications. And that is Microsoft Stream Cloud recordings. So you can, say whether or not you're going to allow cloud storage of your Microsoft Teams recordings if you want to record those. Now you've got a situation where, depending on if you're using Stream and if you have to have Stream stored stuff in country due to data laws in your particular country, where will that be stored? If you do turn it on, and if you don't turn it on, then what happens to your Stream recordings at that point? And if you turn it on, but you're not quite ready and it gets stored over here, and then in-country support is turned on, does that mean it's now going to switch over to your in-country data center? Yeah, there's a nice long laundry list of what ifs here. So if you go out and search on Microsoft Stream Cloud Recording feature, run through that, see how that sets up for you, and figure out how this particular feature is going to work for you. It's going to be starting the rollout in mid-February, expected to be complete by the end of March. And again, it only affects Microsoft Teams recordings. It doesn't do Teams live events. Pretty much, I think if you're okay with what you've got right now, you're probably fine. But again, take a look at this and see how this might affect you and whether or not you need to do something. So
cool. Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things. I'm always interested when they roll out features like this that take progress over time. And it's one of those things. Oftentimes, I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily go through the thinking of where all their data is stored. To be fair, I think for 90% of us out there, it probably doesn't really matter. You just care that your data is accessible, that you can get to it, that you have the information you need. But for some of us, you may actually be breaking the law if your data is stored somewhere that you actually don't realize it is. Hopefully, if that's the case, you're on top of it, or you're in something like a GCC cloud or something like that. But I think being aware of that and what's going on is definitely something that makes sense. So make sure you're doing your due diligence.
Yeah, because they do have some information in here in terms of what areas or regions are affected by this initially, and what they're planning on doing as more and more tenants are enabled for team recording, and whether or not the feature is enabled for in-country storage or not. So definitely take a look at it and see where that affects you.
Yeah, I'll actually go ahead and throw out something else real quick there that
Okay.
we didn't mention last week. It is actually an update from early January, but it's something that we didn't mention last week that I think kind of falls along the line of doing your due diligence. They typically do this most of the time. They'll have, if they are going to make changes, these come out around the start of the new year. But basically, Microsoft updated new online service terms. Basically, the agreement that you do when you're consuming Microsoft Cloud and M365 services, all the stuff that they lay down from a legalese standpoint actually changed this January. So I think it was technically January 8th that it came out. But they've published those online. When you go through and look at the link, there's like 40 languages you can read it in, because Microsoft is doing their legal thing that they need to. But if that's something you're concerned about, or if you just for an audit need to make sure you have the terms, so you have the updated ones, I'd encourage you to go look at them. If you just Google it or Bing it, excuse me, you should be able to find it on the first search. But it's a pretty obvious thing. You can actually go, and it's from their main page. I was able to find it under the licensing section, and has a lot of information out there. I've not read through it because it's a huge document, but just if you need to know that there are new online service terms that came out that are now valid for everything moving forward. So just be aware that happens.
So is this similar to like the pop-up that comes up before you're allowed to start using software, and you say, "Do you agree to all that?"
I
Yep,
agree.
I agree to it. Have you read it? I agree to it. Did you read
South
it?
Park,
I
yes.
agree to it.
South Park made a rather horrible episode about that was funny, but it basically was with Apple and more or less an amalgamation of the Human Centipede movie that came out in the 70s. So we won't go into it too much.
Okay,
but
yeah, let's not.
It basically made an episode making fun of how no one reads the user terms and conditions, and I think about that every time now, for better or for worse. So a couple other things I thought was cool. Microsoft actually did a blog post where they're going through and summarizing some of the new features for frontline workers, primarily revolving around Teams. Some of these we have hit on and talked about over the last several months, but kind of seeing them put together and seeing all the better ways that they've kind of gone through and made the experience for frontline workers. And when we say frontline or first line workers, what I'm really thinking about here most of the time is kind of like retail workers. Think about, someone that's working in a shop assisting customers, someone that's like, at IKEA or at something like that has different services that need to be accessed. And it's basically things that they're doing to make their lives easier. And they had a couple really, really cool ones. They kind of talked about and mentioned walkie-talkie, which you guys have probably, I know we've talked about before. before, but the idea that you don't have to call and make a complete call to someone, it's just while you're walking around on your phone, you have the ability to send a message out to people on their phone that are constantly connected to you, but doesn't keep that call going the whole time. It's not the separate thing. So kind of cool. And if you think about it, this is giving people the option of, how many times are you in a retail setting, you see people walking around with like little, radios clipped onto their belt and stuff. And so putting that basic functionality into Teams where they're having all this other stuff that they can do is probably a pretty smart move on their part. Going from there too as well, a couple other really cool things that they had. One of the things that I thought was cool, and neither Tom or I had really seen this, but the experience seemed pretty awesome. It's what they call SMS sign-in. So it's basically the idea that, again, if you're a first-line worker, maybe you don't necessarily know your email address and password because maybe you don't really have an email address, right? Like I don't know if every person who's a retail worker at IKEA has an email address to log into corporate IKEA, on the back end and be able to see stuff. So in the past, you'd basically be giving them a UPN to log in and a password, and then you have the password complexity that Azure AD requires, which is fairly high out there, and that's probably not something they're used to using. So basically just adding this complexity that wasn't necessarily good. Well, what they've basically done is if your admin goes in on the back end and associates a cell phone number with their account, it gives the users the ability where in their login, they can actually just enter in their telephone number. And if that telephone number is associated with an account in Azure AD, it will text that telephone number a code. You go in and put the code, and it gives you access to your resources just like you logged in with your UPN. So pretty cool, again, if you're looking from a retail worker standpoint. They don't have to know their UPN and their password that has to have, 8 characters and 3 different complexities and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically making them do two-factor authentication or the side of two-factor authentication of the SMS text without them having to know the other stuff, which I thought was cool. Tom, I know you kind of thought this was neat too. You have anything you wanted to comment?
Not really in addition. I think you covered that pretty well. But yeah, I like the idea that certain types of users who may not be technically adept, or they may be technically adept, but as you mentioned, say in a IKEA scenario, the only things that they really do are they log on to the terminal, they look things up, they do transactions, but it's really not any of the back end stuff like Teams to allow them to be able to get in with their mobile device using, multi-factor authentication as their sign-on, their actual sign-on, I think is a really cool idea because it just takes that whole barrier of entry one step further down. And that if you were in security and you had, 15,000 floor workers at IKEA, how many calls are you going to get each day going, I don't remember my password and my ID, that just seems like it would be a horrendous thing that you'd have to try to manage, where being able to say, hey, SMS, here's my phone number, here's the code, type it in, boom, you're authenticated and you
and
go
everyone
for
knows
it.
their cell phone number. So like,
you hope.
Hopefully. It definitely seems cool. There's 2 other things related to kind of login and access for Frontline that I wanted to mention here too. One of them I thought was kind of cool because I hadn't seen something like that. But for first line workers, they're basically going to have a, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to, talk layman's terms here. They have a log me out of everything button, where maybe you have different, workstations you can go through and interact with, and based on where you're at in the building or in the shop, you may, log in at different stuff. Well, it'd be really annoying if at your end of your shift, you then had to walk by and see if you're logged in anywhere. So for first line workers, they'll basically have the ability to say, I'm logging out, please log me out of everything. And any system that you're connected to will basically force log you out. So that way your data is not exposed, your information is not out there, stuff like that, which again, I thought was cool, especially for people that use multiple different access points. And then the final one, this actually brought me back to some of the projects I've had to do in ADFS. With a lot of the awesome regulations coming out of, honestly, driven first and foremost by the EU, you're seeing California follow up with some of them too. We're getting a lot more aware and sensitive to the fact that sometimes overworking yourself is a bad thing. So there are actually laws that are starting to come out. Yeah. So there's laws that have been coming out. The reason I first saw this, I actually worked with a German company that was doing an ADFS deployment with us, and they had to put in ADFS rules in place to do something similar to this. But basically, there are certain places that it's literally illegal for you to work after hours if you're not being compensated for that. So if you're a salary employee, which has implications, you have to make a certain amount of money. That's one thing. But if you're like paid by the hour, even if you want to, I'm gonna, be a good guy and go through and work extra, and they've actually passed laws to make some of that stuff illegal, right? Because they're trying to protect the work-life balance. They're trying to protect the worker, which makes sense. But so Teams has actually implemented some things that's pretty cool where for first-line employees, you can actually put in controls. Either you can just go light and basically have a warning that pops up if they try to access Teams resources outside of their shift saying, hey, you're outside of your shift, you have no obligation to work. We can still let you in and see stuff, but just so you know, like, you don't need to do that. You have to like hit an accept button that you're going in there. Or you can even outright block people where you say, hey, they're working, 9 to 5. The moment that 5 o'clock comes, like, we're not compensating anymore, so we're literally not allowed to let them work. So you can basically have a hard stop at 5 o'clock comes. They try to do something at 5:01. They'll basically tell them, hey, look, you're done for the day. You can pick this up the next time your actual shift starts. And so kind of cool to see some of those stuff coming out and being implemented in, and seeing the level of controls that are there. And definitely, I think ultimately, let's be real, Tom and I are both workaholics, but that's not always a good thing, right? You don't need to be like me and Tom. So having the ability to go through and separate that out, I like to see some stuff like this. I actually see, here's one of the examples of technology doing good, right? Like going through and doing some stuff like that, as long as you have a company with the right mindset, I think is actually a pretty cool policy.
Yeah, and I would be perfectly happy to do a proof of concept with this feature immediately after I get back from vacation. Let's do this. 6 to 3. Outside of that, not available. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
It's my
I'm actually
9
only
hours. That's all
available
you
from
get.
I'm only available from like 10 to 1 in the afternoon. Like, I'll get a lot of work done during that time, but you got that 3-hour block. I mean, no. Anyways,
That was like, I was going to say, we had kind of a running joke where I'm going to go on vacation here and I'll be in Egypt. And I was like, so in Office 365, can't you block access by region? They're like, well, yeah, I believe so. I said, I think we should do a proof of concept during the first half of February that says,
no
don't allow
expectation.
anybody come in from Egypt. Well, what if we need you? Tough. Sorry, can't get
Sorry,
into
I
Office
literally can't
365.
log in to change that for you guys.
Oh, too funny.
So anything else you wanted to bring up, Tom? I'm good from my end.
I just wanted to bring one item up that showed up on Message Center, and it's not necessarily Microsoft related,
Sure.
but do keep a heads up because when this rolls out, it could adversely affect your environment. And that is Chrome version 80 changes the way that websites and cookies work by default. I don't know a lot of the details. This was really the first time I had seen it, but Microsoft basically put in a courtesy notification to say, hey, we've updated our suite of products to be able to work with these new changes that are out there. However, that may not be true of everything else that you do. So they say issues you may encounter if your apps are not prepared. You may have authentication in your applications may loop or fail. Line of business apps that rely upon cross-domain cookies may break, and SaaS applications that your organization use run by other companies may stop working. So they give you a recommendation of what to do and what to test out early. If this is something that you think may end up affecting you, definitely go out to Google, see what's coming up in Chrome 80, see what those changes are, and assess how that's going to impact your environment. Because otherwise, you may wake up after a mass update of version 80 of Chrome and find out that 90% of what you use doesn't work right because of the way that some of these other applications, non-Microsoft related, are handling that type of stuff now. So
Sure. I'll actually give a shout out to one more thing because I saw this while we're going through and thought it was cool. They've announced this for a little bit. They actually have in preview for our tenant, and I'm sure Planet is not in first release because we're a production environment, live captioning going through with Teams.
yeah.
So I just turned it on my side. I have no idea if it will show up on the recording or not. But I was kind of impressed. I had this on when Tom and I were talking before we got on, and it was pretty accurate. I don't think I'm necessarily the most articulate person all the time. I also kind of speak quickly at times, and the fact that it was able to get 95% of my words correct, I was pretty impressed with. So I like seeing this. Obviously, this has pretty big implications for hearing impaired communities and some of the stuff like that. But honestly, just being at I'm thinking in my head some of the conferences I've gone to where there's something going on, I can't hear anything happening. They've had some stuff like this, but seeing it done automatically without like a human sitting there typing stuff up, it's pretty freaking cool to see. So we've talked about this in the past, but this is the first time it's been in production in my own environment. So if you have that as well, maybe go out there and play around with it. I think it's pretty cool.
Well, and what's really nice too is you get that immediate feedback of, hey, here's your closed captioning as it's being done, but you also then get that closed captioning immediately that's part of your recording that then becomes searchable for those words, which is cool, because then that becomes something that adds value to your recording, and you can go search and find out, hey, at the 22-minute mark, this was mentioned. So overall, it makes for really, really good experiences to get that data and actually treat it as a valued resource, rather than, oh, we have a recording that one person's going to look at here in the next 4 years because they weren't here. So
yeah, no, definitely. I've always really loved that functionality of Stream. That's one of the things I always preach when I'm talking to customers is like, hey, look, if you have this and you're capturing the data, it's going to go through and process it for you. That just instantly means like you can start recording meetings if you want and put it in the relevant stuff. And that makes the onboarding process so much easier, because they say, hey, I want to know everything that's going on with the Gillipsy project. They can go in and type in Gillipsy project, and then all the meetings that it was discussed are going to pop up. That's where in the meetings it was discussed is going to pop up, and then go through and see that, which is cool. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as we did. It was definitely kind of interesting to see some of the big news stuff going on. Tom is the same way I am. A ton of our friends on Twitter and stuff like that are people who do similar stuff to us. So it's kind of interesting over the last couple of days to see people that I've known for a long time that are MVPs that are so hot, just like spitting fire about about the big change coming through, and then going through, then also seeing the data breach. Like, it's never a good thing when I'm going through and I have my parents that are 73 and very technologically inept being like, oh, I saw Microsoft had a customer data breach, and it's just like, oh god. So it was an interesting week on the news front at the very least.
Very true. Well, actually, for the next 3 weeks, I believe, you and Jen will be carrying the load.
Enjoy Egypt, Tom.
I will so enjoy my time off. I'm so looking forward to this. So good.
All right, cool, guys. Thank you for joining us. Have a good rest of y'all's week, and we'll see. Well, I will see you next week. Tom will be relaxing on a boat on the Nile.
I'll be thinking of you. Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.